Chapter 12 discusses some procedural issues when you're starting a brand new advisory group. An advisory group might choose to devote its very first meetings to agreeing to these procedures. For example, something like the bylaws outlining who is a member, who can be a member, what are the responsibilities of the group, how do you come to decisions, how often you might meet, and so on. It may be advisable to prepare and circulate a draft of these guidelines way in advance. And also, if you're starting a brand new advisory group, it will make sense for the staff of your organization to call people and interview them on the phone to think about what are some of these potential guidelines for this advisory group. And of course, you might always start by looking at other advisory groups in your city and what are their guidelines and regulation. But you should make sure that if you're establishing this group for the very first time, that the people who are coming on board, they actually agree with the guidelines that are being proposed. And people at this point might vote to have a chair or a co-chair, so they have more power instead of having your organization running everything. The idea is that you actually give them some autonomy, and they have some governance outside of your staff. Still, your staff will provide guidance, and it will attend all these different meetings, but they will allow the advisory group to make recommendations to you. And of course, even though they don't have the power to tell the organization what to do, you should consider very carefully and seriously what they recommend, because this is why you have decided to create an advisory group in the first place. Although, to go back to the first lectures that we had, at the end is the agency's role to actually make the final decision and to take or not to take their advice. So you have a final authority. A board of directors like working in a nonprofit organization or maybe in a for-profit company. So that's like a little bit different than the advisory group. They actually have the power to make changes to the organization, and they can make major decisions. For example, board of directors of a nonprofit organization might even fire an executive director of an organization, or if it's like a company, they might actually remove the CEO. So they can make big decisions and to your organization. But the advisory board is not like that. And usually you will have it in nonprofits, in businesses, and in also governments, but they don't have any voting rights. And this is like the main difference, is that because they don't have any voting rights and that much power, in terms of like asking the executive team or the organization to do or not do something. So the executive meeting team in your organization is actually not obligated um, to receive or seek out the advice at the end after a recommendation has been made. So it is entirely up to the executive or the board of directors of organization to actually make the decision in an organization, and not the advisory board. So that's very important distinction, that the advisory groups, they do not vote. But one of the reasons that they don't vote and make these decisions is because they're actually not elected. Maybe you could elect the chair and co-chair in some instances, but it's not like a full board of people that might have been elected to that position, like in city council, and they will have like a lot of um, power in the city, because presumably they represent the community or the district that they run in, and they also could be like voted out of that district or council, so they have more responsibility on that sense, because they were elected and therefore they can vote and they can make decisions. So that's like the some of the rationales of why they might not have that much power. But all these things obviously are like cultural and social, so they might look different in different places, different circumstances. But again, for the most part, this is the way that advisory group is conceptualized. And we already talked about establishing guidelines to establish a minimum attendance requirements for the membership. So again, in the guidelines or in the bylaws for this organization, or like ruling principles, they might say, you're allowed to miss 6 meetings in a year, which is 50%, or it will say something else. But attendance, it will definitely be something explained as like one of the rules, regulations, or guidelines of this organization. Something else that these guidelines could say is like if you're allowed to send alternates. So if you have like an advisory board of like, let's say, different departments in the city, and one person is like chosen to represent, usually might be the executive director of this organization, right? And then they cannot go that day, they might send alternate instead. But this is like something that it must be stated in the guidelines, and also you need to state, do people vote, alternates can vote or not. Usually alternates do not vote, but the group will still decide using a majority vote, which is like 50% plus. And some people could vote in just depending again on the regulations and your committee. But some people, let's say that you're voting on a particular project, or maybe a person being appointed to the staff, or some kind of position, you might read documents ahead of time, and you might say, this is my decision, and then explain in a letter or do something, an email that you send saying why I took this decision. And then that way you might be able to vote even though you are absent. But the point is that all these things need to be said in these guidelines. You also need like ground rules concerning observers. So are they people that from other offices or any other organizations that might come regularly to this like advisory group meetings, and there might be like some time aside for these people to give reports at the end of what they're working on, or maybe they're like members of the audience, and there will be some particular times, maybe after every agenda item, they will ask if there's like a discussion that needs to be take place, or they will leave it at the end. But advisory groups, they're like different, so some of them will be open to the public and some of them will not be. And remember that advisory groups are not only in government, so you can have for nonprofits. Usually those will be like closed. You still need to know if there's observers that are going to come, and the same thing for a company or a business. So in the city, usually they are open to the public. You might also have subcommittees, and subcommittees are when you have like a large group, maybe like 13 people, and then 3 people are designated to try to understand X, Y, and Z, and then they make a subcommittee to do that. Maybe it's a subcommittee to find new members, and they are part of the governing board, and they make recommendations of like other people that could be part of the advisory group. So they will probably meet every time that is needed. So it might be like once a year in order to look for new members, or maybe whenever it's needed. So it doesn't have to be a particular time. Or it could be that you are in an advisory board that needs to come up with a report or a recommendation specifically. So they do more study and more thinking around a particular issue. I would not recommend this if your advisory board is small, to have lots of subcommittees, because like remember that all these people are volunteers and then you're overburdening them with like more and more work. But if you have a very large advisory group, you might want to have like actually lots of committees. So this is like your working hand. This is how you get your work done. So it really depends on the size of it, and again, it's just depending also what you're trying to do. But subcommittees are always a good idea if you need to do additional work that is like more careful, needs more careful consideration, that it actually needs a small group to concentrate on that.